bison hide shield? Anybody have an idea? How would you do that? What do you think the frame would be of it? Could be wood, right? Okay, and how would you get it to stay on there? They would get it all wet, and they would get it on there as tight as they could around the willow, and then what would happen when it dried? It would shrink right around them. So that's what they did. And they often painted their bison hide shields as well to kind of give them strength in battle. You know, kids are holding up signs for your friends at the ball games, you know, trying to inspire them with these signs. Same thing. They would paint on their bison hide shields something that would give them inspiration. Now, a lot of people think that once Native Americans got hold of guns from either trading or taking from white settlers or the army, that they quit using bows and arrows and these conventional weapons. That's not true. They used them completely through the Plains Indian Wars. Did they use rifles? Yes. Matter of fact, I'll give you an example. At the Battle of Little Bighorn, we know that 56 different rifles were used by the Indians against Custer's men in that battle. How do we know that? How do we know there's 56 different guns used? How would we know that? Different, well, wounds is a good guess, but not as good. That's exactly right. Cartridges. They found 56 different cartridges on the battlefield, and Custer's men all had the same caliber rifle. So it'd be pretty easy to tell, right? Because Custer's are shooting 45-70s, everybody else shoot Henrys and everything else. 56 different types of guns were fired at Custer's men during the Battle of the Bighorn. That doesn't mean they weren't shot with tons of arrows. You know what I mean? Because they were. So that's kind of a myth. Well, if you were a Plains Indian warrior, there were two specific ways you could prove your worth to your tribe. Two specific ways. Anybody know what these are? You could prove your worth to the tribe. I'll tell you what, one of them had to do with love. Stealing enemy horses. Stealing enemy horses is one way that a warrior could show his worth to the tribe. You know what those guys, when they stole those horses, you know what normally they had to do with those horses? Somebody had come around thinking that that Zimmerman gal was pretty good looking, one of these young warrior braves, and he'd go to Zimmerman's dad and say, I'm thinking about courting your daughter. And you know what he'd say? You can court her for what? Horses. You give me so many horses, I'll let you court her. Then pretty soon this person wants to marry Miss Zimmerman, and what's the dad say? That'll cost you X amount of horses. So it's kind of funny. A lot of the Indian braves, when they got married, had to give a lot of horses to get their father's, the father's permission to marry the daughter. So getting horses was a big deal. Another way that a Plains Indian warrior would show his worth is to show bravery in the face of the enemy. Okay? Show bravery in the face of the enemy. So if Carter and I are in a fist fight, and we're getting after it, what I might do when I'm kind of messing with Carter a little bit is I might, kick him in the rear end a little bit and come back and laugh a little bit, or I might come and slap him on the head. In other words, I'm going to touch my enemy and come back unharmed. That was a big deal. That was showing bravery in the face of the enemy. You know what they called that? What did they call that when you went and tapped your enemy and got back safely, showed bravery in the face of the enemy? They called that coup. And keeping track of that, which was a big deal in Native American culture, was known as counting coup. Okay? So if you could show bravery in the face of it, they even had coup sticks. They even made sticks, usually with the round kind of head on the top, that these warriors would take into battle. When I show you Dances with Wolves, you'll see what one looks like. And they would wave that, and they would come at their enemy and hit them over the head with that stick, not to harm the enemy, but to show bravery in the face of the enemy and count that coup. And they keep track by notching their coup stick or painting on it or whatever. But that was a really big deal, was to count coup and keep track of how many times a warrior showed bravery in the face of the enemy. That was a big deal. That was good medicine, so to speak, for a young brave. Now, we always think of fighting with Indians between whites and Indians. Some of the most vicious, bloodiest fights in Plains Indian history was between two tribes, two rival tribes who were competing for, burial grounds or hunting grounds. And usually the bloodiest battles happened after a chief from one of the tribes had been killed in battle. If you killed a chief, holy smokes, the war was on. And Native Americans, through their religion, believed in reincarnation. You may know what that is? Afterlife, where you would die and come back again. And as a result of their belief in reincarnation, oftentimes after a battle, the dead were heavily mutilated. Heavily mutilated. And here is the philosophy: if Caleb and I are enemies, and I kill Caleb in battle, I'm going to go over there and cut off his right arm, because when he comes back in the afterlife and we meet again in battle, guess what Caleb's not going to have? A right arm, because I cut it off. So this mutilization started kind of like that, and then it got so bad that you couldn't even recognize the people that were mutilated. I'll give you an example of that. In the Battle of the Little Bighorn, Tom Custer, who was George Custer's brother, fought with him. They found his body. His body was so badly mutilated, his head was smashed as flat as a pancake. And he had so many arrows in him you couldn't even tell he was a human being. The only reason they could tell who he was is he had a small TW tattoo on his arm. Otherwise, they had no idea who the guy was. So this mutilization got kind of crazy, and it carried on from conflicts between tribes to conflicts in the Plains Indian Wars against white soldiers too. And the mutilization was pretty intense, pretty darn intense. Now, before going into battle, the Plains Indians often looked for religion for strength. What was the name of the Native American or Indian god? What they referred to their god as? The Great Spirit, okay? The Great Spirit. And they would often, prior to battle, look for direction from the Great Spirit through what they called a vision. And basically it was a dream. Most oftenly a hallucination from smoking a little bit too much peyote, okay, which was a strong marijuana, I guess, so to speak. Peyote is something that if you ingested that, it would give you hallucinogenic dreams, kind of like LSD in the 60s, which you'll learn about next year when we get to that. So these Native Americans or these Indian warriors would smoke peyote and have a vision or a dream of what would happen in battle. And it gave them inspiration, oftentimes, in battle. I'll tell you kind of an interesting story. It's kind of off the top, but if you know anything about the Battle of the Little Bighorn, all you really know probably is that Custer fought a bunch of Indians and got crushed, right? Well, there was actually two parts of this thing, three prongs, in which Custer took a unit, and he gave a unit to Major Marcus Reno, and he gave another unit to Frederick Benteen. And Frederick Benteen, he split his already outnumbered men into three different prongs. And Benteen simply was sent out to protect the left flank, you know, in case any Indians tried to escape. Because Custer's goal wasn't to kill Indians, it was to put them on the reservation. He wanted to escape the left flank and get away. So then he gets to the area in which the Indian village is, and he sends Reno on a charge across the Little Bighorn River, and then he goes up on the bluffs and ends up getting annihilated, where Reno engages the Indians, and he and his men retreat up to some bluffs, and where many of them survive. Okay? The point I'm making is the Custer battlefield area that belongs to the government is basically the land that Custer fought on. The Reno charge belonged to a private farmer from Crow Agency, and his son got tired of farming it after he inherited it, and he got kind of crazy here into this history, and he decided to quit farming and start metal detecting this Reno charge area. And I couldn't even, the stuff he found was incredible. Incredible, the stuff he found. Well, he found a soldier's pot that had been smashed flat, and Sitting Bull had drawn on, scratched on the pot, his vision the night before the Battle of the Little Bighorn. And that, I've had that in my hands. That was something. That sold at auction for $500,000. That's how much that was worth. It was like the autograph of Sitting Bull on this kettle, pot, okay? Anyway, I'll tell you that story sometime later, but these visions, they often would then write. And Sitting Bull vision was soldiers upside down with blood tears toward their heads. and he had, tomahawks and different things painted there, but it was quite a thing. You could look it up online if you want to see what it looked like. So, anyway, any questions on any of that thus far? But the visions were important. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about the Fort Laramie Treaty. Settlers start moving westward. Just kind of introduce you to this real quick, like, because not only were we trying to build railroads, what were people doing in the 1850s? Moving west, right? Pioneers, the Oregon Trail, etc. And when these settlers started moving westward, west of the Mississippi, where did they start going through that upset Indians? Their spiritual burial grounds and their hunting grounds. So all of a sudden we're going to have a conflict between whites and Indians because all these settlers who probably don't know any better are traveling westward. They're going right through these Indian burial grounds, which are very sacred to the Plains Indians, and they're disrupting their hunting grounds as well. It's kind of like you get a favorite hunting spot, nobody knows about it, you wouldn't appreciate going into your blind one day and here's somebody you don't know sitting behind your duck blind. I mean, that would be irritating to you, and you'd probably have words with that person. Well, it wasn't much different with these Plains Indians. They did not like it as well. So, by the 1850s, we talked a little bit about this. What three states in particular are people moving to from the west, to westward from the Mississippi? What three states are they settling? Go ahead. California, Cape Wassa. Where are they settling? You should know this more than anybody. Well, Oregon's right. But I was thinking Utah. But you got Oregon. Oregon, Utah, and California. And where all these people are traveling to. Okay? And during this movement westward to Oregon and California and Utah, these settlers are going through Indian prime hunting grounds and Indian spiritual grounds. And they are getting upset. Because this is threatening the Indians' what? Way of life. So what do these Plains Indians start to do? Resist this white movement. And they're attacking these settlers and they're killing these settlers and who knows what. And pretty soon these settlers don't want any more of that. So who do they turn to get this thing figured out? The government. Okay? So these Indians are moving, these white people are moving westward. They're going through Indian hunting grounds and spiritual grounds. The Indians are resisting that. They're attacking these wagon trains. They're killing people. And finally, the government has to step in. And they do this in 1851. In 1851, the federal government is forced to intercede. And what they do is they get together 8 different Indian tribes. And they signed a treaty that we know in history as the Fort Laramie Treaty. So these government officials get together with these 8 Indian tribes and they sign a treaty that will be called the Fort Laramie Treaty. Now when you have a treaty, what happens? You get something, I get something, right? What do the Indians get out of this deal? Anybody know? Well, no. Well, not necessarily. What do they get? What are they going to? They're going to get $50,000 a year for as long as this treaty goes. That's $1.6 million in today's money. So basically, government says, hey, here's what we're going to give you. We're going to give you $50,000 a year in exchange for 2 things. And that $50,000 a year is about $1.6 million today. So what are we going to get in exchange for that? What are we going to get in exchange for that $50,000 a year? What are the Indians going to promise us? What's that? Not land so much, but safe travel westward. Number 1, they'll quit harassing and attacking these settlers. We're going to give them $50,000 a year, starting in 1851, and the first thing they're going to promise is the safety of settlers traveling westward. The second thing that they agree to is they allow the government to build forts along this western trail that these people are traveling. Now, why in the world would we want to build forts on those trails? What's that? That's the one most people don't say. That's right. We're building it for the safety of the settlers moving westward, right? Because there'll be military personnel there, right? But Jordy's exactly right. It gives the people a place to stop, refresh, especially when they don't want to travel, winter. So what happens is we give these 8 Indian tribes $50,000 a year in exchange for the promise they will not attack our settlers moving westward, safe passage, and they allow us, the government, to build selective forts along the western trails. One of those forts we'll get to later, Fort Phil Kearny by Sheridan. Yeah.
Was it each tribe got,
No, the 8 tribes shared that. Yeah, shared that. Yeah, that was a lot of money. Now, this Fort Laramie Treaty worked really well from 1851 to 1865. Not a lot of trouble. So we paid them $50,000 a year from 1851 to 1865, and everything went really well. They left our settlers alone. We built these forts. But something happened in 1865 that's going to change the philosophy on this treaty from the Native American point forever. What happened in 1865? Why did things go to pot? After that 14 years of everything going pretty well, why all of a sudden did it go to pot? That was like, remember 49ers. They lived with that. But it's good to hear right there. Something happened in 1865 that changed it. No, that's what he said. That was early. Okay? Okay. Were that many people coming west from 1851 to 1864? There's a few. I mean, tolerable for the Native Americans. Not that many, tolerable. But what happened in 1865? What ended in 1865? Civil War. And what were people's lives like, especially in the South? So where are they going? We're going to go west. So all of a sudden, instead of hundreds of people coming yearly, thousands of people start traveling westward. And all of a sudden these 8 Indian tribes are thinking, gee whiz, this is probably more than we bargained for. So all of a sudden the population on these trails, the abuse of their spiritual areas and their abuse of their hunting grounds, they could live with it minimally as long as they got that money for 14 years. But once the Civil War ended and hundreds and thousands of people who had no life back east started moving west, it became a problem. Okay? And tomorrow we'll tell you what they did with the problem, how the problem occurred, and what happened. Okay? So the treaty worked well for 14 years, and it worked really poorly from that point on.